thank you for joining me again, John. So just a quick recap for anyone. If you haven't seen the part one, I suggest you do. But we discussed basically up until your second your second prison sentence. So before this, you've been imprisoned. You were out for about out for about 6 months, and then you went into prison again, where we'll discuss it, where you would do the blanket protest, the no wash, and eventually the hunger strike. I did want to ask you, just to start us off, could you, okay, as an ex INLA member, when you think back on like the most like kind of prolific or well-known INLA operations, which are the ones that stand out most to you in your head?
Well, obviously, Harry Neve and Billy Wright, and also a number of loyalists who were shot, high ranked loyalists who the INLA went after. Can't remember all their names at the minute, but I mean, there are different ones we could remember. But in the same way, I remember those who were lost, like Ronnie Bunting, and there was so many, Miriam Daly, and throughout the whole period of the hunger strikes, 1977 to 1981, we didn't really know an awful lot what was happening outside. Obviously, but we did have an input to different things that happened in relation to the INLA. Obviously, because we're the same command staff, the same revolutionary organization, whether inside or out. However, in relation to the number of different jobs or different operations, it really is hard to pick out any other than Harry Neve and Billy Wright.
For anyone, if anyone like didn't know what happened with Billy Wright and him being killed in prison, how would you how would you tell that story? Like what did happen to Billy Wright?
Billy Wright was a prolific killer and a sectarian killer who murdered people young and all different ages, and was responsible directly and indirectly for their murders simply because of their religion, and they were Catholics. Obviously, he was a notorious loyalist who is alleged to have committed quite a number of murders within the Nationalist Republican community, and him and his cohorts in what they call it, both the UVF and whatever organization he identified with at that time. I can't recall them, but certainly that was a major hit by the INLA carrying it out within the prison, within the H blocks. The last place that Billy Wright would have thought that that's where he would be taken out, and he would be safest. And it was a big psychological blow in that respect, in that they felt safe nowhere then. If it didn't feel safe in a prison cell guarded by a prison force made up of 90% people from the loyalist and unionist communities. So it was not just a physical thing, it was major psychological and a prestige operation, which went down very well with a lot of people who had reasons to hate Billy Wright and his cohorts.
Okay, so yeah, so for anyone who doesn't know, the INLA managed to sneak a gun into prison, which is no small feat. There's also a lot of talk. Come again?
I think they smuggled in a couple of guns, a couple of weapons. There you go.
Do you have any insight on as to how they managed to do that?
I know exactly how they managed to do it, because I was in the same blocks for many years, and I know every aspect and layered of them of each of the blocks, and of the wings, and of the yards, the prison yards, and how. But there was only one way it could possibly done, was to cut a sizable hole in the wire to allow them to get in what was called the catwalk and therefore negotiate onto the roof of the blocks or the wings, and that would have led them straight down into the main prison yard, where a van which carried no prisoners going on visits would be waiting for Billy Wright. And they actually must have heard his name being mentioned. I don't know how they determined that exactly when he would be leaving the block to go out on visit, but they were ready anyway. And the thing was ready when operation and waiting their time, and the time just came right. And the two men, carried out that operation perfectly. It was all over in minutes.
There's there's a lot of people who believe that he was betrayed by his own people to the INLA. Any truth to that?
I don't think there's any truth in that whatsoever. It was a really just well planned, well organized operation, which I'm quite sure was quite a bit of time in the making. They had to smuggle in several weapons, and they had to build their intelligence and get their timing. But obviously the target was there. They had the location as well. So this is really down to timing as to when this here man could be accessible. But this year, I mean, Billy Wright, as I said, is notorious among the national Republican communities, and for what he got away with was unbelievable. And the murders he had been involved with, him and Jackson, the Jackal. This was another lawless murder, and Jackson had died of cancer fairly young, but Billy continued on, and he had to be taken out. And unbelievably, the opportunity presented itself, not without the jail, but within the jail. And again, that was a massive psychological blow to the loyalists. Showed them that they don't control everything.
It was a message or an email. I think it was an email from a viewer, and he said that his, like, a relative of his, I think like an uncle or a cousin of his used to be a bouncer on the doors of a particular area, and he said he used to see the RUC drive up in an RUC car with Billy Wright in the back, and they would be pointing people out to him for like potential targets. Did you ever hear of Billy Wright like colluding?
Well, I know quite a people from Portadown. Actually, my mother's from Portadown, so I would have heard various and diverse stories about what Billy Wright become sort of an urban, notorious legend. But anyway, the point of collusion, you already know that this has been well proven fact and all. And as we're talking about Portadown as well here, and Portadown is around Mississippi, and I hate to say it, but that's how we look upon it, in some cases. And Billy Wright could roam and do what he wanted and did and got away, and a lot of his escapes were facilitated. There was a Nelson's eye turned to this, or a Nelson's eye, as a blind eye, turned to that, and so on. It's all well documented. He had to be taken out.
Right, I was going to say one of the things that in terms of like what they did and how they went about carrying their actions, the INLA they kind of made a point to be more like targeting loyalists in a way that the IRA wouldn't engage in so much.
That there is what I perceived anyway. The IRA were involved in the shooting of a number of top loyalists, and they did target them. You had to remember too that it was a loyalist also that killed, first of all, Miriam Daly, and she was a founding member of the IRSP, dedicated, committed member, very much involved in the Haste Plus. And she was murdered in her home in Andytown Road in Belfast. And then I think it was about June 1979, I'm not too sure, not too long after the death of Ferry Neve, the Conservative Tory minister, or Tory minister to be at that time. But also what followed very shortly was in October, I think of the same year, was the assassination of Ronnie Bunting and Noel Little, two INLA, IRSP members and that caused massive controversy. And so collusion was involved in that there as well. Right, and it was the loyalists went after them and killed them. And I can understand how the INLA specifically targeting well-known loyalists and taking them out. And that's just the way it was. You know, at that time, you know, I was looking out and things. I remember I was in jail when all of this was happening, but I wasn't in jail, of course, when the time with Billy Wright and all that did happen. And tell you, when it did happen, I must admit, it was a shock. As much a shock to me, it was to a lot of our people who I would have known. So it was unbelievable the way it was done and where it was done.
Would you be able to characterize any difference in like the types of fellas who kind of joined up with the INLA as opposed to the IRA, putting aside the further left politics, but was there any different like character types or anything that would show up?
Well, within the IRSP INLA, but we did have people who were fairly well educated, politically, ideologically, whatever it may be, and academically as well. You know, we had different people. In fact, I know two former IRSP members. One of them won an Oscar not so long ago, and another is a very successful writer and film producer. They'd haven't mentioned any of their names, so we did have a sort of a different thing, but we are aside of all the ideology and the landness and the Marxist stuff, you know, basically we're all from working class areas. Basically, we all share the same background, community, the same environment, brought up the same way to our school. So, in terms of our cultural and social, in our terms of our socio-economic as well as our cultural, there was very little difference.
Okay, interesting. Speaking of
by the way, I pointed this out by the way in an article I done for a magazine, and I pointed out when my first time I went to jail, I looked around, climbed up onto the roof of the hut and looked down and seen both the loyalists. First time I ever seen compounds holding loyalists, compounds holding Republicans. I mean, these were dire enemies, living cheek by jowl, but separated by compounds. And you know, when I looked down, I remember one of the things I remembered, and that's my first experience. I'm still a young fella at the time, but it still holds true today. Was looking at and seeing all these boys, both loyalists, Republicans, all from working class areas, all wearing the same sort of gear, the denim shirts, and so on. And at that time, whatever the style was from them particular areas at the time, and really they all looked the same. You know, if you take away all the symbols and the emblems and everything else, and you had a person standing in front of you, two of them, you would not know a difference between any really. So it's very much, we all shared that sort of what they call it, all them similarities.
far more in common than different. Yeah, it's such a shame that people from like working class backgrounds during this thing clashed so much, given that they really do have so much more in common than not.
And yes, and that's true. And we still say that there is a pity that we couldn't have all come to terms with this year long ago. But the seeds of all this, what they call conflict, were set long ago, long time ago. Way back. I'm not going to go back into all the history, but there's no point in going there. But you know what did when all this broke out, you know, you had to remember before it broke out. Sorry, we hung about with Protestants, we hung about with Unionists, or whatever we want to call them, doesn't matter. And at that time, I had the unusual experience of growing up at a time when the troubles were just getting underway, but we all mixed with the local unionist problems. I remember dancing in Armagh Orange Hall as a youth, very, very young, dancing in Armagh Orange Hall. Would you believe that on several different occasions and being allowed free because I was so young? And then we hung about with my father, for example, had as many Catholic friends as he had Protestant friends. And he worked with them all his life, and so did we. All decent people, you know, he treated us all very well. My dad worked all his life, my father, and worked with all these people who treated him very well and respected him, and so on. Even so that He died very young at 53. The leader of the DUP, mind you, in Armagh, came to my dad's wake and funeral throughout the whole 3 days. Helped my mother out with some money because there wasn't an awful lot about. And they had done everything he could throughout those 2 3 days. And this was not because he was making a political statement, because his respect for my father and having got to know him and shared maybe many lunches together in orchards, I think this transcended any political or sectarianism, and it was a basic respect for each other. And that, and this was a hardline Republican area this man came into. He could have been shot dead, assassinated at any time. It wouldn't have happened, maybe say because of the funeral, but he came into this area and made himself known, paid respect. So it's just a pity the way of things. But when looking down, going back and reflecting on the compounds or the cages we call them, and looking at seeing all the different people from the loyalist areas, and they were just the same as us. No different.
I wanted to get as a former INLA member, I wanted to get your just okay. So your like description of what like Séamus Costello was like as a guy. If I come along and met you at the time, just kind of asked you like to brief me on Séamus Costello. You know, what was he like?
Well, first of all, Costello was one of those unique figures, not just because of his stature or how he looked and everything else. Looked also very Italian, but he was also a man who had charisma. And I only met him about 4 or 5 different times down in Dublin in 1976. But he had come to Armagh on different occasions. One of those occasions was to deliver the oration at the funeral of Jake McGagan, who was shot along with me in 1973. And he came out there and different things. But he was, how would you call it? He had a certain magic about him, a very strategic thinker, committed socialist Republican, had been involved since the earliest campaigns in Operation Harvest, that is the border campaign in the 1950s. And I was actually in the jail at the time with people who fought along with Costello on the border campaign, Operation Harvest, people like Cahill McQuaid, who's still alive, 86, 87 years of age, and people like Tony Cosgrove and other boys who had known Costello and remembered him well from the 50s. They called him, of course, the Boy General. That was his nickname, and that's how they referred to him as. But certainly one of the most dedicated and charismatic socialist leaders of that particular era, and a massive loss he was, and all for nothing, and killed by who? Killed by people who would have known him or knew, or maybe just didn't know him and didn't care. And unfortunately, a lot of lives were lost. Very important people lost in that feuding. On both sides, you had, for example, Billy McMillan, who would have been a close associate with Costello before the feud, before the split. He was alleged to have been the commanding officer of the First IRA in Belfast at the time. I was just trying Jim Sullivan. I think we're not too sure. No, I think Billy McMillan, yeah. But he was assassinated by the INLA, so all that there, so much loss. But Costello, a man apart, and different in every way, but his commitment and to the working class politics, to the cause of national liberation, and so on. He was always very focused. I don't know. I'd like to have known what he'd been like today. I'd like to have met him today to see how, have a talk with him and discuss how things did, But only time I met him is in the office in Gardner Street. I think it was Lower Gardner Street, maybe. Stickies also had, the first area had, by now I think they were the Workers' Party, Sinn Féin, the Workers' Party. They had offices just around the corner from the IRSP, ironically.
That's in the north inner city area of Dublin, right?
Yes, it is indeed in Dublin. Yeah, Gardner Street, Upper and Lower Gardner Street. I can't remember. It was the IRSP had an office, and I think it was Upper Gardner Street, and the officials, or the Sinn Féin, the Workers' Party, whatever you want to call them, had one in, I think, Lower Gardner Street, or vice versa. I'm not too sure.
Okay, so you you mentioned to me that you never actually met Dessie O Hare, but he's most
Yeah,
certainly
well known in around all the areas of Armagh, Katie especially, and everything else. No, I heard he's done an awful lot of time in jail, that fella. I think he spent about up to about 25, 20, at least 24, 25 years in jail. It must have had an impact on him. He's same age as me, like we're old men. We're both 70 next year. Time flies, time goes by, and and the older you get, they say time goes faster. Well, it's a true, Bill. I can tell you that now. And we're now hitting into our 70s, and quite a lot of us gone. Quite a lot of us quite a lot of others. Uh, they suffered a lot of trauma after the jail experience, and they just many of them just didn't bother no more with anything at all, and boys settled down, had families. But I don't know, but like Dessie O Hare and them boys are like spent a long time. Dominic McGlinchey, I never met.
I see. I see. And would you regard like Dessie O Hare as being like a legend amongst INLA men? He's certainly one of the more prolific kind of single people from the Troubles. He even has his own nickname, which the Border Fox, which alludes to his evasiveness from Gardaí and from authorities.
Well, I don't know an awful lot about Dessie O Hare, no, personally, and anything about it. I've heard a lot about different operations he had been involved in and around the town of Katy and elsewhere, and so on. It becomes a sort of an urban myth and everything else and all. And there's no doubt this man had been active against the British Crown forces in many occasions and at many times. But as for his standing among Republicans, well, I don't know. You'd probably find that would be mixed. There was the feuding, which nearly well, I wouldn't say destroyed it, but nearly destroyed the movement that I was involved in founding and building and everything else and hoping for. And when you become involved in the feuding, no matter who you are, there's a certain, what do you call it, diminishing factor in that you didn't go out against the arch enemy and take them on and fight them in certainly not a conventional way, but through at least you were clear about who your target was, your enemy was ideologically, in terms of the physicality of things. You knew exactly who they were and so on. But when it comes down to shooting local and fellow Republicans, this is exactly what happened, and friends, and taking their lives and so on. You get people will debate and say, "Oh, this is wrong," or "It had to be done at the time," and so on. But the most people will say, no matter what it was, it caused major trauma, political and ideological trauma, in terms of our direction strategy to the movement at the time, as did the feud launched by, the what do you call it, the feud between the official IRA and the INLA. People, like friend against friend, comrade against comrade, people who had stuck together, people who had backed each other up, you could rely on, and so on, going around and putting a bullet through your head or your neck or your back. It went down awful. It caused a major consternation, worry, and fear. And people who left ostensibly, and there were those who just sort of faded away. Okay.
Not just related to the feud or anything, and only if you can share, and even if you can't, that's fine. But when you look back your time, is there any anything you partook in while being in the INLA that you regret, that you look back and think, God, that was wrong. That wasn't really furthering the cause. I shouldn't have done that. Even if you can't kind of say what it is. Is there anything like that in your head?
I don't think, no, you had to put that in a general context. First of all, obviously, when you go into jail and lose your freedom, and nearly lose your life and lose your comrades and lose members of your family, and you take in the whole sort of raft of things there, right? There's obviously going to be regret. You missed out on the best years of your life. Most of us were only about 22, 23. Well, that's obviously average age. All young fellas who have been out going to dances and having a drink with their friends and meeting women, having a family, settling down, building a business. All that was immediately taken away. So there's going to be regrets as to not so much your actions as to what you've done, but how it all, how you end up accounting for it, how you end up being made accountable for it, and that is through the jail. So, I mean, big losses in many, many ways, and a lot of problems ensued, not just within the jail, but for many boys, a lot of major problems ensued in the post-release period as well. No help there for them at all. They were just simply threw outside the prison, maybe after 15, 16 years, and they never seen the outside. Many of them hadn't even seen a colour television until the 80s. And you can imagine, and maybe when they were in the jail, there was old Morris Minors or Humbers, old cars, and they're going out now and they're seeing a whole different. You can imagine. Anyway, look, you can say you have regrets about this, that, and the other. I don't think anybody has any regret. There's anybody who does not have some regret about one thing or another.
Speaking of Dessie O Hare and speaking of prison, he actually very recently got out of prison for something he was convicted of long after the Friday. God above.
Yeah.
I'd love to interview him. He'd be. I'm sure he probably wouldn't, but God, to be a dream interview anyway.
You don't know. I mean, that's only the amount of contact and all that. This year, fella's done a lot of time in jail. His family has suffered as well as everything else, not as well as other families and all. You know what I mean? He's trying to get his act. Guys come into what they call this a situation where we're living in a vastly changed political and socio-economic landscape, and then cultural terms and technology. The world is changing that fast, and the pace of changes. It's incremental on a daily basis. Okay, so going all the time. So this man has adapted and changed. And I think myself, we've got this stage now, after 25 years of the ceasefires and the Good Friday Agreement and everything else. People like Dessie O Hare, not just him, others, they have the right to be forgotten.
As in meaning forget.
We all have that right to be forgotten.
As in meaning like forget about them and let them kind of get on with their life.
Yeah, I don't mean forgotten about in the sense of the real sense of the term, but I mean to let them get on with their own lives, to get back to their families, and so on, let them deal with the trauma of the past in their own way. But after, any man, it doesn't matter if it's Dessie O Hare or anybody else, but any man has spent such a massive period of time, I mean, adjustment is going to be very, very difficult and everything else. So, the less hype about him, the less focus from the media about him and what that. And I believe this here man now is saying, right, I'm now hitting 70 years now, not too far off it, whatever it is. He's saying, I'd like to spend these years with my family. I want to prioritize every day.
That's
And that will apply to Dessie to anybody.
Sure, of course. Okay, speaking in prison, well, remind us there what was okay. So you served an initial sentence back when you had special category. You were released. You were out for I think about 6 months. You said, and then you were back in. Remind us when you went back in and what the charge was, if you could.
Right, I came out of jail in July 10th, 1976. I had a summer record ever, and of course went back into Armagh, to my home, back into the Republican areas. And you think that you're going to leave it all behind you, but not really. You're still a member. of the organisation. You still have that affiliation and affinity. You still have all those things. That does not leave you. You carry it with you in your head. You don't carry it with you in any other way. It's all there. It's built into you, or else it's been allowed to grow within you. But when I came out, the situation hadn't much changed in 1976. In fact, I was under the impression that there was a revolution still in full swing. And what created that mindset is the fact that you've been so revolution radicalized within the jail. And you were not so, that it wasn't done on purposely, but you had done it maybe to yourself as well. You had become more and more politically aware, educated, and more committed, and so on, because you knew more of exactly what you were fighting for and what you believed in and what your aspirations, aims, and objectives were. You're much more rounded in the whole thing. So you come back out and you were straight back into doing what you did before you went into, and so on, right? And so on. But things had changed drastically in 76, and there was you could sense that there was not the same direct community involvement. Support had fell away for a lot of different things. You know, it was 76 was the emergence of the peace people, of course, and a whole change was taking place within the British government. The Tories were in power, and I think, yep, no, Labour still in power. I think, yeah, they were. Tories followed, but it didn't matter. And by the way, just to make a comment, it didn't matter whether it's Tories or Labour. Brad Bees, the wee Yorkshire dictator, as we call him, right? It wasn't so much even what they call it. Well, who did I mention there earlier on in terms of the Tories? Can't remember. But I don't think it really mattered if Tory or Labour, tell you the truth.
Okay.
Or who was in power.
Okay, so what was your charge when you went back in?
Charged with armed robbery and possession of firearms and so on.
And by the time you got into Long Kesh, the second time, excuse me, special category status was gone, and I'm correct in saying that, like, from day one you were on the blanket.
Oh no. That's when you're sentenced. You go on to remand in the Crumlin Road jail first, prior to being, sentenced, brought to the courts, and you spent a fair period in remand. So I was remanded on the 24th of December, day before Christmas, in 1976, and I was on remand until September 1977, when I was sentenced to 14 years, and then shortly, moderate days, several days after my sentence, I found myself on the blanket protest in September 1977, and remained there until it all finished in 1981.
Okay, so before the no wash protest, which preceded the hunger strikes, how long were you on, like, we'll say, just the blanket protest before no wash?
Well, the blanket I went on, I think it was about the first week in September 77. That's when I was sentenced, first or second week. So you were on the blanket from that day on, from the more or less the day you were sentenced. You were taken down to the blocks, the H blocks. You were taken to the one particular block, which was H5, and which was now the main blanket protest block, where those who were not conforming and making certain demands to be recognised as political prisoners or to recognise a special category. And there was only one block at the time, it was H5, and when I went down on the blanket, there was only actually, if I remember, 2 wings in H5, which were being used to house protesting prisoners. So it was very early days and so on, and at that time there's no such thing as a no wash protests or spreading your excrement on the walls and everything like that. That all became an escalation, a direct reaction to what was happening within the prison regime, a direct reaction to the strategy now being pushed by the Thatcherite regime, which was now in power, to criminalise the Republican cause, to smash the IRA, to smash the Republican movements, and to do it through the prisoners. And thus we were now in what we call the burn of wheel, the gap of danger. We were at the very interface of the struggle. And the whole focus now began slowly to turn to the haste blocks. And herein was fought the ultimate battle against criminalisation and the so-called Ulsterisation policy of the unionists and so on, So we knew that these were going to be hard times. Things had changed. This wasn't special category status. At one side of the wall was me in a cell, naked, except for a blanket around me. And at the other side of the wall was my brother. And he had all recognition of political status and all the perks and and all the different sort of everything that was won in 1972 is now gone for us. And by May 1972, I mean a result of the hunger strike by Billy McKay and others in the Crumlin Road jail for political status, or for be recognised as a political movement.
Can you while you're on the blanket, can you describe to people, let's say someone had no idea how the guards would treat you and the kind of beatings and at times torture from the guards. Can you go into some of that?
Yeah. Just as modern terminology, right? We refer to them as screws. It's an old, what do you call it, slang word. But our prison officers, right, whatever it is, when you hear me saying the word screws, I mean guards. And first of all, let's set down the reality. 99% of the prison regime, including the tertiary levels, as well as what they call all the different levels, were unionist. They're from unionist background, members of the Orange Order, members of all the different loyalist orders, had openly wore their affiliation to UDA, UVF. This was like, we were like Palestinians being held in an Israeli prison and subjected to the same hatred and the same vile and so on. So no surprising that the prison regime was now at the foremost. This is the foremost weapon in the armory of Margaret Thatcher's regime, of the Thatcherite regime, the prison service, and she was going to use him as much as possible. Put in the five governors controlled the jail. 2 of them were shot dead, and so on. But what we entered into was a whole new era, and everything was at stake, and so much was at stake, and it wasn't of our making, and so on. This was all goes back to a thing called the Garden Report, which advocated the end of political status. That came out in 1974 or 75, sorry, after the fire of Long Kesh burnt down all the cages, and the British were determined it was not going to happen again, and therefore they built the blocks. So that was the end of special category status, but became more than just the end of it. This was what they called the big stick that the Tories were going to beat the Republican cause with. Okay.
Okay.
The blanket was necessary, unfortunately. And what followed was the escalation of the blanket. The no wash system. I mean, we didn't shave and we didn't really wash, take showers, because we got reports by this time of year, about maybe 1978, many more on the blanket and many more beatings were taking place in brutality, and it got worse and more intense. And with certain people within the jail were advocating it, and with certain people within the jail were carrying it out, because you can't just, what they call it, tar all the screws as being, psychopathic, but people determined to do this, what do you call it, carry out these actions. They weren't all like that. There was good and bad, you know what I mean? But we certainly knew who the bad were. But bear in mind that most of them are from loyalist areas, and their affiliation was quite clear and made clear to us. They were involved in torture, beatings, beating men naked. And you had to remember, you beat a man naked and it's 3 or 4 years and you're very heavily booted and suited to do so. It causes quite a lot of fear and trauma. But then not just the person getting the beating, but when you hear the sound out there rumbling and thumping and the screams of men in the wing, that you can imagine the psychological impact that was having on people. And each morning we all say, I'm next, and so on. So this virulent hatred, visceral hatred, emerged between ourselves and the prison administration, and the prison regime, and that included right down from the governor's status to what's called the POs, principal officers, senior officers, board of visitors as well, and right down to the ordinary screw who was there and ready to do all the beating and thinking that he was not going to be accountable. And yet the irony of it all is they were accountable and they were made accountable for it. And it was their own fellow staff members who ended up getting executed or assassinated, whatever you used to call it, killed. And this was mainly as a direct result of the actions of others who skulked away and hid. And a lot of these here ones were people who didn't even live in the north. They were squaddies, former British Army squaddies who had joined the prison service for the easy money. There was danger money for this. There was dirty money for working in the protests. There was extra money for all these enticements were there, and these British squaddies took advantage. But they also took advantage of the fact that they were in against their mortal enemies, and they weren't going to behave nice boys. And so they carried out a lot of the harassment, torture, and beatings, and all the different whole what do you call it? It was our Guantanamo.
I was I haven't interviewed him yet, but we'll speak sometime. There's a gentleman named Sam Miller who was ex-IRA and he was on blanket himself. He said I heard him say in another interview that I think almost every day he checks the obituaries and he's looking out for the names of like the guards that were particularly bad. And he still very much holds like a bitterness and a resentment towards him. Is there anything like that in your head or your heart?
Surely there is. And that would apply, and I know Sam, and I understand how he feels and why he feels that there. And I mean, the resentment, bitterness, and also this constant desire for revenge that sometimes that these people will be brought up before a court of justice and exposed and everything else and all that, right? And then the deeper any wishes, I wish I had killed that bastard, or I wish I had killed that bastard, or so on, and I don't want to put a tooth in it, but that's just exactly how it was thought. So, I mean, Sam would know very well there was no tears shed when any of the screws were executed, or when we heard the news the next day or that night that they were executed. And yes, some boys were delighted and cheered, other boys were just happy and content, and other boys didn't think nothing of it because very simply it was what they deserved, it was coming to them, no surprise. It was
I
just coldness there. We just wished there had been more. At that time, we wished that it had gotten more. I mean, they shot 2 governors. The provisional area shot Albert Miles, number 2 governor, next to Stanley Hillness. I'm sure if I had got Hilders, we got the same. And also a fellow called McConnell, William McConnell, and he was now governor. And then you had what's called McConnell himself was in charge of security at the time. A lot of boys were beaten very, very, very badly. I'm not saying he was directly responsible for it, but he was the man who was in charge of security at the time, along with other cohorts within the prison who were in charge of security. I don't want to mention any names here at the present minute, but I can easily mention 3 or 4 names. But these people, some are dead and respected of that there, and others are, well, I don't know, they're probably still hiding.
I actually interviewed this Alan Miles, who was Albert Miles's son. Did you Sorry. So when you personally found out that a particular member of prison staff had been assassinated, when the word would come down to you, how did you personally react?
Well, I have to remember where we were. We're living in, we're existing in a cell 9 by 9 by 6, two of us. It's covered in human excrement and the walls and the ceiling and everywhere, all right? And we have suffered and endured so much over the years. Well, I mean, how would you think we felt?
As in, would you be happy to the point where you would like jump up and down and celebrate, or would it just be okay and nice?
Oh, I don't think we really. Some of the boys were a bit punched the air and all, and someone's a lot about that's a great job, good job, and who is this screw? Nobody knows him, and and so on. Or someone and some of them who we didn't know, they openly state clearly this was a good target, that was a good hit. On other screws, but I don't know, we didn't even know any of them. But I mean, I think the situation was so warlike within the jail, and what was happening was so intense and everything else. I don't think we actually give a lot of time and thought to the actual taking out of a prison officer screw, but we're more concerned as to what's going to happen after it. And we knew that would lead to more beatings and lead back into that vicious circle and cycle of revenge and of retaliation and so on, and would keep on going and yet the people responsible, a lot of them responsible for the beatings, so-called hard men, which other screws described them as, who beat young fellas and tortured them and so on, right? You know, I felt also even among the screws themselves, the prison regime, they took it par for the course, and all they cared about was living for that day and every other day and so on, right? You had to there was a difference between those screws like the Scottish, British squads. You come in and beat people because of their vengeance and hatred for their political beliefs and so on. And then there was the career screws who had joined maybe before it all, and they joined the prison service because they want to make a career of it and and so on. You understand? Now, not we didn't see too many of them in the haste blocks, and we didn't see too many of them either. But there is a certain sect about who wanted to treat you as professionally as possible. It was almost impossible to do so. You were lying naked, putting your shade on the wall every day, and you were in unbelievable conditions. So well documented. I don't want to go into them right now at the present minute, but people don't understand. We locked up 48 hours a day. Sorry, 40. Sorry, 48/7. Locked up 48/7 with 1 hour out at the weekend on Sunday to go to mass, where we were able to communicate for 1 hour. And you're locked up every single day for years in this cell. Two of you, and I think it's up to about 28 to 30 men in a wing, maybe 40 even at times, two men in the cell, which is built for one. Well, all I can say is there's a lot of resentment, but I meant you carry it with you, you carry it with you no longer how much you live.
Of course, of course. What I was going to say, okay, so when it did come to the targeting of particular guards, like was it a case that a particular guard would be seen as someone who's like excessive and who kind of goes above and beyond, or was it just the case?
There's a well-known. This is the documentary it's well recorded by the provisional area prisoners, in relation to particular screw, and he was blew up. This was after the protests, and I think it was about 2 years later. It was known as the Red Rat, and on that particular occasion, a lot of people were openly delighted that the Red Rat paid the consequences for his actions throughout the whole period, because a lot of boys had a lot of bad memories, a lot of trauma and torment as a result of that man's actions, and his cohorts, some of us who were all executed as well. But as far as we're concerned now, at that time, all we wanted to do was do our time, get it over with, and so on. And we had 5 simple demands, and they could have been mad easy, but the whole thing escalated into a much, much bigger thing. It became the very crux of the struggle, the armed struggle, and prisoners found them right at the sort of the cold face of it all, if you wish.
So, given across your various years in prison, I mean, you had to just exist inside a cell for that many years. I'd imagine that there'd be a lot of things you'd have to do in your head just to stay sane, you know, just to kind of
Yeah.
entertain yourself or keep yourself going. Can you describe some of them and answer me, like, did any of them, given that you did it for so many years, did any of those patterns like get ingrained in your head and would persist post prison, you know?
Well, anybody who has experienced prison or who has will always tell you that they carry that element of jail within and that experience jail with them in their subconscious, it's in their memory, right? They compartmentalize it as much as possible to let them get on with their lives. But it's there, and it can be resurrected at any time, either via trauma or just simply a memory appearing or a simple thing. You know, so all that trauma is deposited away. It's there, and sometimes it affects people every day. For a wee bit, you know, you have to manage it, and other people it affects very, very deeply, and has affected very deeply. And you know, a lot of people come out of jail and resorted to drink and later to drugs and all finds a way of coping. And a lot of people designated and diagnosed with PTSD, clinical PTSD, and so on. You know, and you know, funny, just imagine the impacts of things. Recently, I'm diagnosed with PTSD myself, but recently I read a book by an American soldier, and as well as a collective of what he called a collective of counselors and people involved with the American army who fought in Iraq and Iran and wherever it may be, and Afghanistan and everything. And you know, the book is called I always sit with my back to the wall. I have it here somewhere, but everything in that book I could identify with, all the PTSD. And I know that everybody else who was with me and on the blanket and has endured all the times that we did, and the hunger strikes and the deaths, and you know, each death was traumatizing. Well, that book brought it back to me in many, many ways. And I realized that all prison trauma, all prison experience has a universality to it. And that universality is manufactured not by the elements of the environment or the prison regime itself, but it's manufactured within the mind and memory of those who endured it. And that's where it lies, and that's where it lives.
If you don't mind me asking, how does your PTSD kind of manifest itself? Is it a case of getting flashbacks or
They get flashback, but terrible nightmares. You know, so the nightmares are so vivid and real. You know, it's just sometimes I think I'm actually there. You know, and I for a long, long time had terrible what do you call it nightmares, but they're easing now as I get older, and I'm managing to cope in different ways, and I got counselling and so on. You know, and I read up in PTSD and all the different elements. And lucky for me, I have a good advisor nearby who's a good counselor and so on, you know, and he's a comrade as well. So, you know, but I think myself, like, prisoners are a bit like, you know, the AA, Alcoholics Association. And, you know, they have identified the problems and know what the problems are. They've learned to talk to each other about them because they're young, which they'll understand. They have a certain advice and rhetoric and all the rest. But so in many ways, you know, there's that sort of what they call it affinity with each other in the terms of our shared experience. So
um
we know exactly I would know what Sam Miller's talking about, and I would know exactly what other boys were talking about. The trauma, people don't understand too, the trauma, the loss we experienced too, loss of family members outside, loss of our commies inside, next week is the anniversary of Mickey Devine, the 20th of August. After 60 days, Mickey died on, what do you call it, I think it was in the hospital wing, yeah. And it was a terrible time. The last of the hunger strikes, moved into double figures. But I knew Mickey well and had been beside him for a long time, for many years in the blanket, and everything else. Shared a lot of things. I knew his capacity, his abilities. Knew you get to know people like that. When then the loss comes, you just don't pass up and say, this is the political situation. This is the dire consequences of it. This is our 1916. This is our this, that, you never think about it in them terms at all. You think it only in terms of how you knew that person personally and how they got on. And then you can judge that person ideologically or in terms of his courage after the fact. But first and foremost, we got to know each other, we became comrades, but we also became friends. And in some cases, enemies.
Would I know generally speaking, men don't kind of talk about their feelings and speak vulnerably about things, but when former blanket men do get together or bump into each other or whatever, or sit down and have a drink at an event or something, do like have you ever spoken about it with fellas who went through the same thing, or is it just something that kind of happened and you kind of don't speak about?
No. There's been a lot of work done, a lot of research done into the impacts of long-term imprisonment and the effects of long-term imprisonment. And in fact, I was involved in with a group called AXPAC, actually Ex-Prisoners Assistance Committee, which has been formed and managed by Tommy McKerney, a fellow hunger striker. And one of the things that they tell it was a major research by two top forensic scientists, forensic psychologists. And I don't know if I can mention their names now, but that was a major insight in the report into the impact of imprisonment and the trauma within the prison and the impact on families and everything else and all, and how it done. And then the Larless done one too. And again, working back to that working class thing, lo and behold, the same story. Boys caught up with alcohol, drugs, not facing up to what happened, families being split, marriages breaking up, uh, people incapable of coping with everyday tasks, um, and in a lot of cases, early death.
Can you talk to me a bit about the kind of the escalation and the various like escalating steps that led up to the no wash protest being at its peak? I'm especially from the outside looking in, the aspect of rubbing of smearing your own excrement on the wall. It very much seems like something that's cutting off your nose to spite your face. So yeah.
Is I'd like if you don't mind to continue with that in another interview.
Not
So
me.
hold on, can you hear me?
Yeah, no, I was muted for a second. As in, we'll do another interview where we'll go on and speak about
Just to
the no
cover
wash and
that,
hunger.
just to cover that particular period, because it's very sensitive. That is still very sensitive for like to me.
Of course, and
These things.
only
You know,
only
I
only
don't
what.
really like talking about them. And people say, "Will you do anything else?" No, and I see it every day in my life. But if I go back to them years, 43 years ago, 44 years ago, the first song is right now, 44 years ago this October. I look back and out there, but I can say to you clearly, whether in jail or out of jail, there's not a place that I don't go anywhere to Red Ireland or here and anywhere that I will not see some symbol or some reference or some indication of the hunger strikes. You know what I mean? And we all have to live with that there. You understand that is something we live with. These are constant reminders, which, you could say I do without, you understand, because of the personal involvement. For everybody else, it's just no part of their history. But when I see Mickey Devine's portrait up on the wall, or Patsy O'Hara and Bobby Sands and you name it, well, that's a different connotation altogether for me. You understand? And I can't tell anybody. I no point in me stopping in the middle of the street and saying, "You see that fella there? point to Mickey Devine. Well, we ain't having many an argument and we had a great time and great told stories. You haven't got all the time to do it there. Oh, because that's an historical issue now and historical figure. And therefore you just keep your mouth shut and say nothing.
That sounds to me. That sounds to me like it would be quite an isolating feeling to have such strong feelings and emotions when you see something, but being unable to share them or being unable to find many people who could relate to it. It sounds quite isolating to me.
But isolation would be like an understatement because literally there's very few people in this world can talk about it. There's very, and we want to extend that even further. There's no other nation in this whole world except the Irish, us people, the Irish, especially the Irish Republican people, who actually commit themselves to such no action that's going to cause so much pain and sacrifice and starvation and trauma and everything else. No, we're the only nation in this whole world, on this planet, that actually carries out this form of protest and starving yourself to death. And what people don't understand when you're starving yourself to death, when you see, well, I tell you, see if you're under the blankets and you're starving for about 10 days, there's quite a smell coming off your body. It smells like decay. And it's there every
It
day.
sounds like the what?
Decay. It sounds like decaying, a decaying body. But you can't sit there and explain that to everybody, you understand? About the smell of the body. So that's it. But I think myself, what I'd like to do, John, if you don't mind, was to maybe arrange for another talk with you, and we'll talk about the hunger strike. We'll talk about the lead up to the hunger strike, what went on in the background, what didn't go on, and so on, and what it led to. And I'll finish on this. You know, people like myself and my generation who took part in the first civil rights marches in 1968 at the age of 13 and 14, because we're all right beside it and amazed. Now I look back now on 52, 53 years of my involvement as a Republican socialist, and I look back and I look at the landscape, the physical, well, not so much the political landscape, the constitutional landscape, and everything else. And I look back and see some massive, just transformed. It's metamorphosis, and that's what it is. And a lot of it's for the better, a lot of it's for the good. And which is why I fully support the peace process. And I'd like to maybe touch on that there and where I am now. Sometime next time I'll touch on where I stand politically, ideologically, and so on, you know what I mean? I still have my affiliation to believe it or not, to the IRSP. You understand? I still have an affinity with the IRSP. And always had from 50 years now. In fact, 50 years in October.
Cool.
50 years in 6 weeks. 50 years in about 6 weeks' time.
No problem at all. Yeah, I can understand. It's you know, it might be like a tough thing to talk about. Kind of need its own thing. Yeah, we'll do another we'll do it on a Zoom and we'll speak
We
about.
do know what I'll do is time I'll get my dates and all right. I'm getting too early for remembering. I'm not all the pens aren't firing. If I can use that term, the pens aren't firing and all thing, you know, in terms of memory. But I'll sit down next time and talk about it because it is an emotional issue. It still impacts me. It's still raw in many times. And you know, not too many will remember it's Mickey Devine's anniversary next week on the 20th of this week.
That's my
Right.
birthday. My birthday is the 20th actually.
There you go. So you're not that's one thing you'll not forget anyway. But I'm only saying I want to just pointing out how, you know, how the impact of the hunger strike is perceived by the general public, by those who are historians or people who want to understand that particular era. But to me, it's a different road. You know, I for me to tell that story, I have to walk down a different road altogether from anybody else. And it's a lonely road, you know.
No, I'd imagine it's not like for you. It's not like a historian just saying what happened. It's your life and your years and your pain. Yeah, no, of course.
Exactly. If you knew the people, he knew what's happening. He knew what could have been done, what could not have been done, and how impossible it was, and how we tried to avoid hunger strike, and all the terrible brutality and from the regime that we had endured up until then, and how they played a major role in ensuring that the whole thing was being corralled into one specific outcome, and that is hunger strike causing death. And they played a major role in all that there. You know, I'm talking about the regime and the administration. I'm talking about the political regime at the time, outside and inside the deal.
Thank you very much. We'll speak again there, and I don't know, in like a week or two, whenever you like, and you've some time to kind of go over and stuff.
I'll email you, right? What I'll do is I'll do a bit of reading here. I want to read Tony O'Hara's book again, and he wrote a book. You know, The Time Has Come. It's called. You might know Tony O'Hara, Patsy's brother. But anyway, and there's a few wee things I need to read there before I talk about the hunger strike to get my story straight.
Of course, and thank you for everything you've shared so far in our 2 interviews, and I'm very much looking forward to the third. Thank you very much.
No problem, John. I hope it's of help. Okay.